Number 10, Kevin Lionel says, regarding Paul's vision of heaven, 2 Corinthians 12, why can't Paul tell us what he saw? Did he see something bad? Why do Paul and God have to be secretive and hide things? I sense frustration potentially in your question there, Kevin. So let's look at the passage, 2 Corinthians 12, and he says, so Paul does something interesting here for those who aren't familiar with it. He describes himself. He's talking about himself, but he says, I know a man. and he's like, but he's talking about himself, but he says, I know a man. And the reason why he's doing this is because Paul, in the letter, he's partly talking about his qualifications. Here's why I'm qualified to be an apostle and to do the ministry I'm doing. And he feels embarrassed. He feels like a fool for talking about his qualifications. So he distances himself a little bit by saying, I know a man. And he's speaking of himself. This is so different than how some people recount their heavenly visions. So he says, I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven. So the heavens, multiple heavens, the terminology here, it's not Mormonism. it's talking about heaven being God's throne, and then the other two most likely here. And I have spent time researching this issue, right? The other two being like the sky, the birds fly in the midst of the heavens, and then further out like stars, that area of heaven. So he was caught to the spiritual location where God is, right? He was caught up to the third heaven, whether in the body or out of the body. I don't know. God knows. Okay, this partly answers your question a little bit, Kevin, is that perhaps Paul doesn't want to tell you too much because he's not sure he understands what he saw. And so he doesn't want to confuse you. It's a wise teacher who doesn't comment too much on things he doesn't understand that well. And hopefully I walk in that wisdom more often than not. So that might be part of it, is that he just literally doesn't understand. So he doesn't know what to say about all this stuff. He says, I know this man was caught up into paradise, whether in the body or out of the body. I don't know. God knows. He says it again. I don't even know if it was in the body or out of the body. I don't even know. So obviously he's a little fuzzy on exactly the details. And he heard things that cannot be told, which a man may not utter. That's really strange sounding, right? But he heard things. There are things he heard, not what he saw, what he heard with his ears, which he can't say a man may not utter. What does that mean? Well, I mean, if he told you what it meant, then he'd basically be telling you the thing he can't tell you, right? So there's something going on there. And there's other translations put it differently. Look at the New King James, verse 4. He says, he heard inexpressible words, which is not lawful for a man to utter. Inexpressible words. That's different. And not lawful, it means it's like inappropriate. It's wrong for me to say it, but inexpressible is different. Inexpressible makes it sound like I heard stuff I just literally couldn't communicate to you with words. There are things that I experienced there that I could not put into words for you. That's what that sounds like, inexpressible. But it's not lawful for a man to utter. It implies something else, implies something inappropriate. It could be that if he tried to put it into words, it would be inadequate and it would end up being offensive because he would wrongly represent heaven. What he saw was too glorious for him to try to describe it. And this would be like me describing for you a sunset. It's like, well, no matter what I say, it's never going to do justice to a sunset, right? There's a sense in which at least me, not having that linguistic skill, it would be inexpressible. It would be wrong for me to try to lower the description down to that. So this may be part of what's happening there, is that sort of idea. Yeah. But back to your question, is like, why is it that even God himself hides certain things? Jesus, we have several possible reasons for this. Again, my caveat always, when you say, why won't God do this for me? That's always a dangerous territory, because we can go from asking thoughtful questions to childishly judging God. Very quickly, we can move that way. So let's do it from the asking thoughtful question side for a second and say this. Some things we're not ready to see. There's things we simply can't comprehend. And I know that sounds annoying, but think about a 7-year-old asking you about like marriage. And there's parts of you that are like, kiddo, you'll understand when you're older. Or your kid, you're just 5 years old and they're like, Mom, I don't know why you have to go to work. Just stay. Let's go to Disneyland today. Can't we just go to Disneyland? Why do you have to go to work? And you're like, I tried to explain it. I told them 10 times. Like, you'll get it when you're older, right? And it's not until they're buying their own toilet paper that they understand. and that's part of reality, right? Like, there's a sense in which when I'm in God's presence, there are things I will comprehend that even if he told them to me now, I wouldn't. right? Like now he tells me, I work all things together for good to those who love me. And I'm like, I trust you, but I don't like understand it. But I trust you, but I don't really when I'm in his presence and he wipes every tear away, I will understand that fully. God says, I'm going to judge the world. And some of us think, well, that judgment seems harsh. And he goes, look, I told you sin was bad. I showed you how bad it was. I had my son die on the cross for the sin. I tell the world they're in rebellion against me. And then I judge the world. And you look at me and you say, you're too harsh, God. Well, but one day will come when we'll stand in his very presence. We'll see his holiness. We'll watch his righteous judgment. And we will approve. Even though you may not think you will approve. You will go, whoa, I didn't see it from that perspective, God. Now I know you're right. So our limitations are part of the problem here that limit our ability to receive things God has to say. There's other stuff too, I'm sure, but those are at least a few things.